A ruthless billionaire sits in his mansion on Christmas Eve, surrounded by luxury but utterly alone. His own children refuse to see him. Then a desperate woman with 4 crying babies bursts through his door, and in 60 seconds, everything he thought he knew about power, family, and redemption shatters forever. Welcome to Stories by Jason. If you're settled in and ready for a good story, hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I've got another exciting story coming your way tomorrow, and trust me, you don't want to miss it. Thank you so much for the love and support. You're truly appreciated, and I'm so grateful to have you here with me. Also, let me tell you something funny. Someone actually bet that I can't reach 1,000 subscribers before the end of this year, and honestly, I want to prove them wrong. So if you're watching this right now and you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button and join the family. Reaching 1,000 subscribers is a very personal goal for me, and your support would mean the world to me. Thank you for believing in me and being part of this journey. And before you go, drop your name and location in the comments. I'd love to give you a special shout out in my next video introduction. The snow fell like silent judgment over Manhattan, blanketing the city in white that would turn gray by morning, much like everything Marcus Kane touched. From the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse on the 89th floor, the Christmas lights below looked like dying stars, distant and irrelevant. He stood there in his $5,000 suit, a crystal tumbler of 50-year-old scotch in his hand, and felt absolutely nothing. Marcus Kane. The name made boardrooms freeze and competitors sweat. At 68, he'd built Kane Industries into a $12 billion empire spanning real estate, tech, and media. Forbes called him a visionary. The Wall Street Journal called him ruthless. His children called him nothing at all. They hadn't spoken to him in 6 years. The penthouse was a monument to success and a mausoleum of isolation. Imported Italian marble, original Rothko paintings, furniture that cost more than most people's homes. Everything perfect. Everything cold. The Christmas tree in the corner, decorated by his assistant because Marcus Kane didn't do sentiment, stood like a sculptured ice formation, its lights programmed to shift through precise color gradients. Even his holiday was algorithmically optimized. His phone sat on the glass table, dark and silent. No calls. No messages. His 3 children, Michael, Sarah, and Jennifer, were somewhere celebrating Christmas with their own families he'd never met. Grandchildren he'd never held. His ex-wife Patricia had died 2 years ago, and even in death, she'd had the last word, a letter delivered by her attorney that simply read, "You were brilliant at building everything except what mattered. I hope you find that before you die alone." He had found it. Tonight proved it. Marcus drained the scotch and poured another. The alcohol was supposed to dull things, but numbness was already his default state. He'd fired 300 people 3 days before Christmas to boost quarterly numbers. It was just business. Good business. The shareholders loved him. The stock price soared. But when he'd returned to his penthouse that evening, the silence had felt different. Heavier. Like it had weight and texture, pressing against his chest. Dinner sat untouched on the dining table, a catered Christmas feast prepared by a Michelin-starred chef. Roasted duck, truffle risotto, and soufflé that had probably deflated by now. He'd sent the staff home hours ago. Even they had families to return to. Marcus walked to the table and sat in the chair at the head, a king in an empty kingdom. He picked up his fork, put it down. The food looked like a painting, beautiful and completely inedible. Everything in his life looked like that, pretty from a distance, meaningless up close. His reflection stared back at him from the darkened window, a gray-haired man with sharp features, cold blue eyes, and a jaw set in permanent judgment. His father's face, he realized. The same man who'd taught him that weakness was death, that emotion was liability, that the only thing that mattered was winning. Marcus had learned those lessons well. He'd become exactly what his father wanted. And he'd lost everything that made life worth winning. The memory came unbidden, as they often did now in the quiet hours. Michael's 8th birthday. Marcus had missed it for a merger meeting in Tokyo. When he'd returned 3 days later with an expensive toy, Michael had looked at him with those big, disappointed eyes and said, "I didn't want a present, Dad. I wanted you." Marcus had told him to stop being dramatic. That was the moment he could see now when his son started disappearing. The other moments followed like dominoes. Sarah's graduation, Jennifer's wedding, Patricia's diagnosis. Always another deal. Always another conquest. Always another reason why business came first. "You're a coward," Patricia had told him during their final argument, her voice weak from chemo but her words sharp as surgical steel. "You hide in your empire because you're terrified of being human, of being vulnerable, of admitting that maybe, just maybe, all your money and power can't buy you the one thing you actually need, to be loved." He'd walked out. 3 weeks later, she was dead. He'd stood at her funeral surrounded by hundreds of mourners, and he'd been utterly alone. His children had stood together on the other side of the casket, a united front against him. They didn't cry. They just stared at him with something worse than hatred, indifference. He'd become so inconsequential to them that they couldn't even muster the energy to hate him anymore. Marcus stood abruptly, the chair scraping against marble. He walked to his home office and opened the drawer where he kept the file. He didn't know why he tortured himself with it, but he took it out anyway. Inside were photos of his grandchildren, secretly obtained through private investigators. Emma, 7. Lucas and Sophia, 5-year-old twins. Jackson, 3. He didn't know their voices, didn't know their favorite foods or what made them laugh. He was a stranger with their genetics, a ghost they'd maybe hear about someday as a cautionary tale. The landline rang, an ancient sound in his modern fortress. Marcus stared at it, his heart doing something it rarely did. It hoped. Maybe it was Michael. Maybe somehow, miraculously, one of his children had decided to reach out, to forgive, to... "Mr. Kane," his building manager's voice crackled through. "We have a situation in the lobby. A woman with babies. 4 of them. She's asking for shelter from the storm. I told her this is a private residence building, but she's quite insistent. Should I call the police?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "Why are you calling me?" "Because, sir, she specifically mentioned you by name. She said you're her only hope." The words hung in the air like smoke. Marcus's mind raced. He didn't know any women with babies. He didn't know anyone, period. "Sir?" "Send her away," Marcus said flatly. "This isn't a homeless shelter." "Understood, sir." "Mary." Marcus hung up before the man could finish. He returned to the window, his reflection staring back at him. Outside, the blizzard was intensifying, winds whipping snow into frantic spirals. The city was shutting down. Even in Manhattan, Christmas had the power to make the world stop. His chest felt tight. He told himself it was the scotch, but he knew better. It was guilt, that ancient, useless emotion he'd spent decades trying to kill. Some woman with babies was out there in the storm, and he just closed the door on her. So what? People faced hardship every day. It wasn't his responsibility to save everyone. He'd built his fortune by making hard choices, by knowing when to cut losses. This was no different. Except it was Christmas. And he was alone. And somewhere in the building below, a desperate woman was being turned away into the freezing night. Marcus grabbed his phone, his thumb hovering over the call button. He could reverse the order. Let her stay in the lobby until the storm passed. It would cost him nothing. But something stopped him. That old instinct, the one that said any crack in the armor was weakness, any moment of compassion was vulnerability. He put the phone down. And then he heard it. Through the insulated walls and soundproof windows, impossibly, a baby's cry. Not one baby. Multiple babies. The sound was distant but unmistakable, a chorus of newborn desperation that seemed to pierce through concrete and steel and pride. Marcus stood frozen, his hands still on the phone. The crying continued, growing fainter. They were leaving. Being escorted out into the Christmas night, into the blizzard, into whatever fate waited for people who had nowhere else to go. He thought of his grandchildren. Of Emma's face in the photograph, smiling at something beyond the frame. Of the second chances that don't come. Of Patricia's letter, "I hope you find that before you die alone." Marcus Kane made a decision. He didn't know if it was the scotch, or the loneliness, or something deeper that he'd thought was long dead. He grabbed his phone and dialed the building manager. "Bring them up," he said. "Sir? The woman and the babies. Bring them to my penthouse. Now." There was a pause. "Are you certain, Mr. Kane? Before I change my mind." Marcus ended the call and stood in the center of his immaculate living room, his heart pounding in a way it hadn't in years. He had no idea what he was doing. No idea who this woman was or what she wanted from him. All he knew was that for the first time in longer than he could remember, he'd made a choice that wasn't calculated. That didn't serve his empire. That might, impossibly, make him human again. The elevator chimed. They were coming. Marcus Kane straightened his tie and prepared to meet whatever chaos he'd just invited into his fortress of ice. The elevator doors opened, and Marcus's first thought was that he'd made a catastrophic mistake. The woman who stepped into his foyer was soaked through, her thin coat dripping melted snow onto his imported marble. But it wasn't her appearance that froze him, it was her eyes. Dark brown, exhausted beyond measure, but blazing with something fierce and unbroken. Dignity. The kind that poverty couldn't strip away. And in her arms, in a modified baby carrier contraption that looked homemade, were 4 newborns. 4 tiny faces, red and wrinkled and crying, bundled in blankets that had seen better days. "Mr. Kane," she said, her voice steady despite her chattering teeth. "My name is Amber Robinson. Thank you for seeing me." Behind her, the building manager looked apologetic and deeply uncomfortable. Marcus waved him away. The elevator doors closed, and suddenly it was just Marcus, this woman, and 4 tiny humans who couldn't stop crying. "You're wet," Marcus said, his voice coming out harsher than intended. Years of boardroom intimidation didn't just switch off. "You'll ruin the floors." Amber Robinson didn't flinch. "Then tell me where I can stand that won't ruin anything and I'll stay there." The response caught him off guard. No apology. No groveling. Just practical defiance. Marcus found himself respecting it even as it irritated him. "The bathroom is down the hall," he said stiffly. "There are towels. Dry yourself and the babies." "They're called the Quadruplets," Amber said, moving carefully in the direction he'd indicated. "And they have names. Faith, Hope, Grace, and Joy. Born 9 weeks ago. 3 girls and a boy. Joy is the boy, in case you were wondering." Marcus wasn't wondering. He was questioning his sanity. What was he doing letting strangers into his home? This could be a setup. A robbery. A scam. He should call security and one of the babies, Faith, Hope, Grace, or Joy, he had no idea which, let out a wail that seemed to contain all the suffering in the world. The sound pierced through his thoughts like a knife through silk. The other 3 joined in, creating a symphony of misery that made his temples throb. "They're hungry," Amber called from the bathroom. "And cold. And scared. Babies feel everything, Mr. Kane. They don't know how to hide it yet." "Unlike adults," her tone implied. "Unlike you." Marcus stood in his foyer, paralyzed by indecision. This was absurd. He didn't know anything about babies. He'd been a terrible father to his own children, always traveling, always working. Patricia had handled everything. And now here he was, decades later, alone on Christmas with 4 screaming infants and their impossibly composed mother. Amber emerged from the bathroom, slightly drier, the babies still strapped to her in their makeshift carrier. Up close, Marcus could see she was younger than he'd first thought. Maybe late 20s, early 30s at most. African American, with high cheekbones and natural hair pulled back into a practical bun. She had the kind of beauty that hardship had sharpened rather than dulled. "I need to feed them," she said matter-of-factly. "Do you have a clean surface? A table or counter?" Marcus gestured toward his rarely used kitchen. "There." She moved with practiced efficiency, despite obvious exhaustion. From a bag he hadn't noticed before, worn and patched, she pulled out bottles and formula. Her hands shook slightly as she prepared them, the only sign of how close to her breaking point she actually was. "Why are you here?" Marcus asked, his arms crossed. He knew he looked like what he was, a man defending his territory. "How do you know my name?" Amber didn't look up from her work. "Because 5 years ago, you fired my husband." The words hung in the air like an accusation. Marcus felt his defenses slam into place. I've fired thousands of people. That's business. If your husband couldn't perform, he performed brilliantly. Amber cut him off, her voice sharp now, the composure cracking. David Robinson. He was a software engineer at Kane Tech, worked 90-hour weeks, created the security protocol that you still use today. Then he discovered a flaw in one of your contracts with the Department of Defense. A flaw that could have compromised national security. He reported it to his supervisor, who buried it because fixing it would have cost money and delayed the delivery. Marcus's jaw tightened. He remembered now. Vaguely. There had been some issue, some whistleblower situation that got messy. If your husband went over proper channels. He did, Amber said, her hands moving mechanically, bottle after bottle. He followed every protocol. And for his trouble, he was fired for performance issues that mysteriously appeared in his file overnight. Blacklisted in the industry. Couldn't get another tech job. Started driving for rideshare companies. Worked himself into the ground trying to provide for us. She finally looked up at him, and Marcus saw tears threatening at the corners of her eyes, though none fell. Then I got pregnant. Quadruplets. High-risk pregnancy. David picked up extra shifts, worked 20 hours a day. One night, driving his third shift, a drunk driver ran a red light. David died instantly. That was 9 months ago. The baby's cries had subsided into whimpers as Amber efficiently fed them, holding 2 bottles in her hands and positioning the other 2 with her arms. It was a practiced choreography born of necessity. Marcus felt something cold settling in his stomach. Not quite guilt, he'd insulated himself against that long ago, but something adjacent to it. Unease. Responsibility. The knowledge that actions had consequences, even ones he never saw. I'm sorry for your loss, he said, the words automatic and hollow even to his own ears. Amber laughed, a bitter sound. Are you? Are you really? Or is that just what people say? What do you want from me? Marcus asked bluntly. Money? Compensation? Because if you're thinking about a lawsuit, I want you to tell me, Amber interrupted, her voice suddenly fierce, how you sleep at night. I want you to explain to me how destroying a good man's life for telling the truth was worth it. I want you to look at these 4 babies, your husband's legacy, your careless cruelty's collateral damage, and tell me it was just business. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of babies suckling bottles and the wind howling against the windows. Marcus stared at this young woman who'd lost everything, who'd somehow tracked him down on Christmas Eve, who'd braved a blizzard with 4 newborns just to confront him. It was insane. It was brave. It was, why tonight? He asked quietly. Why Christmas? Amber's shoulders sagged. The fierce armor cracked, revealing the exhausted, terrified woman underneath. Because I'm out of options. My landlord evicted me yesterday, couldn't make rent. I've been staying at a shelter, but they're full tonight. Holiday overflow. I walked for hours, trying to find somewhere, anywhere. And I remembered David talking about you. About your penthouse, your fortress in the sky. I remembered him saying you lived alone, that everyone knew the great Marcus Kane spent every holiday by himself. And I thought. She laughed again, but this time it sounded like crying. I thought maybe someone who was alone would understand what it's like to be desperate. Something in Marcus's chest cracked. Just a hairline fracture, but enough to let in a sliver of feeling. He looked at the babies. Faith, hope, grace, and joy, their names a cosmic joke given the circumstances. They were silent now, feeding, their tiny faces peaceful. Innocent. Unaware that their lives had been shattered before they'd even really begun. How did you get into the building? He found himself asking. I told the doorman I was your daughter, Amber said with a slight, sardonic smile. Told him it was a surprise Christmas visit. By the time he figured out I was lying, I was already in the lobby, and the babies were crying and causing a scene. Sometimes chaos is the best strategy. Marcus almost smiled. Almost. It was the kind of ruthless pragmatism he would have employed himself. This woman was a survivor, playing every card she had. You can't stay here, he said, but the words lacked conviction. I know, Amber replied. I'm not asking to move in. Just one night. Let us sleep somewhere warm. In the morning, I'll figure something out. I always do. The babies finished their bottles. Amber began the process of burping them, one by one, with the weary efficiency of someone who'd done this hundreds of times. Marcus watched, fascinated despite himself. There was something mesmerizing about her competence, her refusal to break even when any reasonable person would have shattered. The guest room, he heard himself say. Down the hall, third door on the left. It has an ensuite bathroom. There are clean linens in the closet. Amber froze, staring at him. You're letting us stay? One night, Marcus said firmly, more to convince himself than her. That's all. In the morning you leave. Thank you. The words were simple, but the way she said them, with genuine gratitude and no trace of the anger from before, made Marcus uncomfortable. He didn't want her gratitude. Didn't deserve it. He was just doing the bare minimum of human decency, and the fact that it felt like a grand gesture told him everything about how far he'd fallen. Amber gathered the babies and her meager belongings. As she passed Marcus, heading toward the guest room, one of the babies, Grace, she murmured, the only girl with a tiny birthmark on her left cheek, reached out a hand. Tiny fingers, impossibly small, waving in the air. Without thinking, Marcus extended his finger. The baby grasped it with surprising strength, her eyes opening to reveal dark pupils that seemed to look directly into him. For a moment, they stayed like that, a broken billionaire and a 9-week-old baby, connected by nothing but a touch and the strange alchemy of Christmas. Then Amber moved on, and the connection broke. Marcus stood alone in his foyer, staring at his finger where the baby had held it. He could still feel the warmth. The innocent belief that the world was safe and adults would protect you. He walked back to his living room, to his untouched Christmas dinner and his glass of expensive scotch. But he didn't sit down. Instead, he stood at the window and watched the snow fall over the city, thinking about David Robinson. About a man who'd done the right thing and paid for it with his life. About 4 babies who'd never know their father. About choices and consequences and the weight of an empire built on broken lives. For the first time in 6 years, Marcus Kane felt something other than numbness. He felt ashamed. And beneath that, even more terrifying, he felt the faint, flickering possibility that maybe, just maybe, redemption wasn't completely impossible. Down the hall, he heard Amber singing softly to the babies. A lullaby, gentle and heartbreaking. The sound drifted through his penthouse like a ghost, filling the spaces that had been empty for so long. Marcus closed his eyes and listened, and for one moment he allowed himself to remember what it felt like to be human. Marcus couldn't sleep. He'd returned to his bedroom around midnight, dismissing any thought of checking on his unexpected guests. What would he say? What would he do? He was a businessman, not a babysitter. Yet he lay in his king-sized bed, a bed that had never felt more absurdly large, and stared at the ceiling while his mind raced. Around 2 a.m. he heard it. The crying. Not the desperate wails from earlier, but a single baby's distressed whimper, growing louder. He waited for Amber's response, for the sound of her soothing voice. But it didn't come. The crying intensified. Marcus sat up, irritation and concern warring in his chest. He pulled on his robe, $800 of Egyptian cotton that suddenly felt ridiculous, and walked down the hall. The guest room door was slightly ajar. He pushed it open carefully. Amber was asleep, fully clothed, sprawled across the bed in the boneless way of the truly exhausted. The 4 babies were arranged around her in a makeshift nest of pillows and blankets, an intricate fortress that kept them safe while she slept. But one of them, Joy, the boy, Marcus thought, recognizing the slightly larger frame, was awake and fussing, his little face scrunched up in displeasure. Marcus stood in the doorway, paralyzed. He should wake Amber. This wasn't his problem. He didn't know anything about babies. But looking at her, at the dark circles under her eyes, the way her body had simply surrendered to sleep, he couldn't bring himself to disturb her. Instead, he found himself walking closer. Joy's eyes were open now, staring at nothing in particular, that unfocused gaze of infants. His fist was in his mouth, sucking frantically. Still hungry maybe? Or just needing comfort. "Hey," Marcus whispered, his voice rough. Hey, little guy. He'd held his own children, of course. But that was 3 decades ago, and even then, Patricia had done most of it. He'd been awkward, afraid of breaking them, more comfortable in a boardroom than with a baby. Now, looking at Joy, he felt that same fear magnified. The baby's whimper grew louder. Marcus made a decision he'd probably regret. He reached down, so carefully, and picked Joy up. The baby was warm and surprisingly solid, heavier than expected. Marcus held him against his chest, one hand supporting the head the way he vaguely remembered you were supposed to. Joy's crying stopped. He blinked up at Marcus with those dark, curious eyes, and then, impossibly, seemed to relax into his arms. "Don't get used to it," Marcus muttered. "I'm not good at this." But he found himself walking, that instinctive rocking motion that apparently lived somewhere in human DNA. He moved to the window overlooking the city. The blizzard had calmed, leaving Manhattan buried in white. Christmas lights twinkled across the skyline, and for the first time in years, Marcus saw beauty instead of just property values. "Your father was a good man," Marcus found himself saying softly. "I didn't know him well. That's the truth of it. I didn't know any of them well, the people who worked for me. They were numbers, assets, performance metrics. I told myself that was just business. That personal feelings had no place in running an empire." Joy made a small sound, not quite a coo. His tiny hand grasped the fabric of Marcus's robe. But he was right. "David. About that contract. We cut corners. I knew about it, not the details, but I knew we were pushing boundaries. And when he reported it, when he did exactly what any ethical person should do, my executives buried him. And I let them. Because fixing the problem would have cost us millions. Would have made me look weak. Would have been admitting a mistake." The words kept coming, confessions to a 9-week-old baby who couldn't possibly understand but who listened with an intensity that made Marcus feel seen. "I've made a lot of choices like that. Thousands of them. Each one seemed small at the time. Just business. Just necessary. But they added up. They became who I am. A man so focused on building an empire that he forgot empires are made of people. People with lives and families and futures that I casually destroyed for quarterly earnings." Joy yawned, a tiny, jaw-cracking gesture that was absurdly endearing. Marcus felt something in his chest, a tightness that wasn't pain but something closer to thawing. "Like ice melting. I have 3 children," he continued. "Michael, Sarah, Jennifer. Grandchildren too, though I've never met them. I was a terrible father. Always working, always prioritizing the company. I told myself I was providing for them, building a legacy. But what I really built was a wall. And now they're on one side, and I'm on the other, and I don't know how to tear it down." He thought about Michael's last words to him 6 years ago at Patricia's funeral. "You know what's tragic, Dad? Mom spent her whole life waiting for you to love her more than your company. She died still waiting. We all did. But we're done now. We're finally free." The memory hurt in a way Marcus hadn't let himself feel before. He'd always told himself they were being dramatic, ungrateful, that he'd given them everything, private schools, trust funds, every material advantage. How dare they act like he'd failed them? But standing here at 2 a.m. on Christmas morning, holding another man's son, a man whose life he'd destroyed, Marcus finally understood. They'd been right. He had failed. Spectacularly. Completely. And no amount of money could fix it. "Your mother is extraordinary," Marcus said, glancing back at Amber's sleeping form. "To survive what she survived, to care for 4 of you alone, to have the courage to confront me tonight, that takes a kind of strength I don't think I've ever had. Real strength. Not the fake kind that comes from power and intimidation. The kind that comes from love." Joy's eyes were closing now, his body growing heavy with sleep. Marcus continued rocking him gently, afraid to stop, afraid to break whatever fragile piece they'd found. "I don't know how to fix any of this," he admitted. "I don't know how to be a different person. I'm 68 years old. I've spent my entire adult life being Marcus Kane, the ruthless billionaire. The man who wins at any cost. How do you change that? How do you become someone worthy of forgiveness when you're not sure you even know what that looks like?" The apartment was silent except for the distant hum of the city. Marcus looked out at his kingdom, the skyline he'd helped build, the empire that bore his name. From up here it all looked so small. Temporary. Meaningless. Maybe that's what Christmas is supposed to teach us, he said softly. That we're not meant to be islands. That connection is what makes us human. That love isn't weakness, it's the only thing that actually matters. Joy was fully asleep now, his breathing slow and even. Marcus carefully carried him back to the nest of blankets and lowered him down with a gentleness he didn't know he possessed. The baby settled in next to his sisters, and the four of them created a picture that made Marcus's throat tight. Family. The things he'd traded for success. He looked at Amber again. In sleep, the lines of stress on her face had softened. She looked young. Vulnerable. And he was struck by the injustice of it, that this woman, who'd done everything right, who'd loved her husband and was raising their children with ferocious devotion, had been dealt such a catastrophic hand. While he, who'd destroyed lives and relationships with casual cruelty, lived in luxury and comfort. It wasn't right. It wasn't fair. And for the first time in decades, Marcus Kane felt the weight of his responsibility. Not as an abstract concept. Not as a line item on a balance sheet. But as a real, tangible obligation to another human being who deserved better than the world had given her. He walked back to his room, but instead of sleeping, he sat at his desk and opened his laptop. The glow illuminated his face as he began to search. David Robinson. Software engineer. He dug through old files, archived emails, personnel records. The deeper he went, the clearer the picture became. David Robinson had been exceptional. Top marks from MIT, glowing performance reviews, a patent for encryption software that Kane Tech still profited from. Then came the security flaw report. Marcus found the original memo, flagged as urgent, detailing a vulnerability in their Department of Defense contract that could expose classified communications. David had been right. The flaw was serious. And what had Marcus's executives done? Buried it. Discredited David. Manufactured performance issues. Fired him with cause to avoid severance. Then quietly fixed the flaw months later, after David was gone, without ever admitting the problem existed. Marcus felt sick. This wasn't just bad business. It was malicious. Calculated. Wrong. He kept digging. Rideshare employment records. Medical bills from Amber's pregnancy, costs that were staggering even for quadruplets. Insurance that didn't cover nearly enough. Then the accident report. David Robinson, 32, killed on impact by a drunk driver at 3:47 a.m. He'd been working his third shift of the day, trying to pay off medical debt and prepare for his baby's arrival. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his hands shaking. The paper trail was damning. Not legally, he'd covered his tracks too well for that. But morally, ethically, humanly, he'd killed this man. Oh, he hadn't been behind the wheel of that car. But he'd set the dominoes in motion. His company, his culture, his ruthless prioritization of profit over people. David Robinson's death was the inevitable endpoint of a philosophy that treated human beings as disposable. How many others? How many David Robinsons had Marcus created over his decades of empire building? How many lives casually destroyed, families torn apart, futures ended because of his choices? The sun was rising now, painting the snow-covered city in shades of pink and gold. Christmas morning. Marcus stood and walked back to the window, watching the world wake up. Somewhere out there, his children and grandchildren were celebrating, laughing, creating memories, living lives that he wasn't part of because he'd chosen this empty pinnacle of success. But maybe it wasn't too late. Not for his own family, that bridge might be permanently burned. But for Amber. For faith, hope, grace, and joy. Maybe he couldn't undo the past, but he could change the future. He could do something right for once. Not out of guilt. Not for redemption. But because it was the right thing to do, and maybe that was reason enough. Marcus Kane made a decision. He would fix this. Not with a check. Money was too easy, too meaningless. But with something real. Something that honored David Robinson's memory and gave his children the future their father had wanted for them. He just had to figure out how. And then convince Amber to let him help, which, given how fierce she was, might be the hardest business negotiation of his career. Behind him, he heard movement. The babies were waking up, their morning chorus beginning. And despite everything, despite the guilt and shame and weight of his failures, Marcus Kane smiled. It was Christmas morning. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, he wasn't alone. When Marcus emerged from his study 3 hours later, he found Amber in his kitchen, feeding the babies with practiced efficiency while also making herself coffee using his $3,000 espresso machine that he'd never actually learned to operate. "I hope you don't mind," she said, not looking apologetic in the slightest. "I needed caffeine, and you have better equipment here than most coffee shops." "It's fine," Marcus said. He'd changed into casual clothes, though his idea of casual still involved $400 designer jeans and a cashmere sweater. He felt awkward in his own kitchen, unsure where to stand or what to do with his hands. "The babies slept well," Amber continued, her voice carefully neutral. "Thank you for letting us stay. We'll be out of your way soon." "Where will you go?" The question came out sharper than he intended. Amber's shoulders tensed, that defensive pride snapping back into place. "I have options," she said, which they both knew was a lie. Marcus poured himself coffee, buying time. He'd spent 3 hours researching not just David's case but Amber's current situation. What he'd found had only made him angrier. Evicted despite paying rent on time for 2 years, the landlord had decided to renovate and triple the rent. Rejected from 3 shelters due to capacity issues. Medical bills still piling up. No family support. Amber's parents had died in a car accident when she was 19, and David had been estranged from his family. She was utterly, completely alone. "I've been thinking about your husband's case," Marcus said carefully, sitting at the kitchen island across from her. "The security flaw he reported. The way he was treated. It was wrong." Amber's hand froze halfway through preparing a bottle. She looked at him with suspicion. "Why do you care now?" "Because I should have cared then." Marcus met her gaze directly. "I didn't know the details. I won't insult you by pretending I was hands-on with every personnel decision. But I set the culture. I created an environment where reporting problems was punished and covering them up was rewarded. Your husband's death. I'm not responsible for the drunk driver. But I'm responsible for the circumstances that put him on that road at 3 a.m., exhausted and desperate." Amber's eyes glistened with tears she wouldn't let fall. "What do you want me to say? That I forgive you? I can't. David was everything. He was brilliant and kind and funny, and he loved these babies before they were even born. He painted their nursery, read to them through my stomach, had names picked out. And then he was just gone. Because he tried to do the right thing." "I know," Marcus said quietly. "And I can't bring him back. But I can try to make things right for you and for them. With money." Amber's voice was bitter. "That's what you people always think. Throw money at the problem and it goes away." "Not just money," Marcus said. "Though yes, financial support is part of it. But more than that. A real opportunity. For you and for your children." Amber laughed harshly. "I have 4 9-week-old babies. I haven't slept more than 2 hours straight since they were born. What kind of opportunity could I possibly take advantage of right now?" Marcus pulled out his phone and opened the file he'd prepared. 5 years ago, before David died, you were a graphic designer. Freelance. You had clients including 3 Fortune 500 companies. Your work was exceptional. I saw your portfolio. Then you got pregnant, high risk, and had to stop working. After David died, you tried to go back, but childcare for 4 infants costs more than you could earn. Amber stared at him. "Have you been investigating me?" "Yes," Marcus said bluntly. "No point in lying. I wanted to understand your situation. And what I found is that you're trapped in a system that punishes you for circumstances beyond your control. You're talented, educated, and capable. But our society has no infrastructure to support a single mother of quadruplets. So what's your grand plan?" Amber's tone was defensive, but Marcus could hear the desperation underneath. She wanted hope, even if she was afraid to reach for it. "You're going to wave a magic wand and fix everything?" "No," Marcus said. I'm going to offer you a job. Silence. One of the babies, Grace, he thought, recognizing the birthmark, made a small sound. Amber automatically adjusted her position, never taking her eyes off Marcus. A job, she repeated slowly. Doing what? Creative director for Kane Media, Marcus said. We're launching a new digital division. I need someone to head the design team. Someone with vision, talent, and the ability to build something from the ground up. The salary is $200,000 a year, plus benefits, including the best health insurance money can buy. The position comes with flexible hours, remote work capability, and if you need it, on-site childcare that we'll create specifically for your needs. Amber's face went through a series of expressions: shock, disbelief, anger, and finally, a dangerous kind of hope. You're creating a position that doesn't exist. For me. Because you feel guilty. Yes, Marcus admitted. All of that is true. But it's also true that I need a creative director, and you're qualified for the role. Better than qualified. I looked at your work, Amber. You're brilliant. And you deserve a chance that your husband's death and your circumstances have denied you. I don't want your pity, Amber said, her voice shaking. I don't want a fake job created out of guilt. I've survived this long on my own. I can keep surviving. Can you? Marcus asked, not unkindly. For how long? Where are you going when you leave here today? What happens next winter, when the babies are crawling and need more space and stability? What happens when they start asking about their father, and all you can tell them is that he died because he did the right thing, and the world punished him for it? Tears were sliding down Amber's face now, though her jaw was set in defiance. You don't get to use my children against me. I'm not using them against you, Marcus said. I'm asking you to think about what's best for them. Pride is important. Dignity is important. But so is giving your children a future. So is accepting help when it's offered, even if it comes from someone who doesn't deserve to offer it. Why? Amber demanded, her voice breaking. Why do you care? You don't know us. We're nothing to you. We're a guilt trip that walked into your penthouse on Christmas Eve. In a week, you'll forget we even existed. Marcus stood up and walked around the island. He stopped a few feet from Amber, wanting to respect her space but needing her to see his face, to understand he was serious. Last night I held Joy, he said quietly. Around 2 a.m. He was crying and you were sleeping and I picked him up. And for the first time in decades, I felt human. I felt like maybe I wasn't completely beyond redemption. Your children, your beautiful, innocent children, they reminded me what actually matters. Not empires. Not wealth. But connection. The basic human obligation to help each other. He paused, gathering courage for the next words. I have 3 children who won't speak to me. Grandchildren I've never met. I destroyed my family pursuing success. I can't fix that. But maybe I can do this one thing right. Maybe I can give David Robinson's children the life their father wanted for them. Not as charity. Not as pity. But as justice. Because your husband was right, and he deserved better, and his family deserves better. Amber was fully crying now, her body shaking with sobs she'd probably been holding back for 9 months. The babies, sensing her distress, began fussing. Marcus, acting on instinct he didn't know he possessed, picked up Faith and Hope, cradling one in each arm. They settled almost immediately, staring up at him with those dark, trusting eyes. I'm scared, Amber whispered. I'm so scared that if I let myself hope, if I believe this is real, something will happen. Something always happens. Life will pull the rug out, and I'll fall again, and I won't be able to get back up. Then let me be the safety net, Marcus said. Let me prove that sometimes people can change. That sometimes the system can work for you instead of against you. Please, Amber, let me do this. She looked at him, at her babies in his arms, at the impossible situation they'd found themselves in. Marcus could see her weighing everything: pride versus pragmatism, suspicion versus hope, the past versus the future. There's a condition, Marcus continued, sensing he needed to give her some control. If you take this job, you take it seriously. No special treatment. You're expected to deliver excellent work. I'll provide flexibility and support, but I need actual results. This can't be fake. It has to be real, or it won't mean anything to either of us. You'd fire me if I didn't perform? Amber asked, a slight smile breaking through her tears. Absolutely, Marcus said. After a fair review process and multiple warnings, of course. I'm trying to be a better person, not a pushover. Amber laughed, a genuine sound that transformed her face. She wiped her tears and stood up, walking over to Marcus. She took faith and hope from his arms, holding them close. Then she looked directly into his eyes. I'll take your job, she said. On one condition of my own. Name it. You have to try to fix things with your own family, Amber said firmly. You can't help us and then go back to being alone in this fortress. If you're really trying to change, then change completely. Reach out to your children. Meet your grandchildren. Be the man you should have been 20 years ago, starting today. Marcus felt his chest tighten. That was asking for the impossible. His children hated him. They'd made that clear. Trying to reach out would only mean more rejection, more proof of his failures. But looking at Amber's fierce expression, at the 4 babies who represented both his worst mistakes and his potential redemption, he found himself nodding. Deal, he said. I'll try. I can't promise they'll forgive me. But I'll try. Amber smiled. A real smile, full and bright and hopeful. Then you have yourself a creative director, Mr. Kane. Marcus, he corrected. If we're doing this, you should call me Marcus. All right then, Marcus. She extended her hand, still holding 2 babies. Thank you. For last night. For this morning. For giving us a chance. Marcus shook her hand, and for the first time in years, he felt like he was building something that actually mattered. Not a company. Not an empire. But the connection. A bridge between his broken past and a possible future where he might actually deserve the life he'd been given. The babies cooed, and outside, Christmas Day was in full bloom. The city was waking up, families gathering, children opening presents. And in Marcus Kane's penthouse, something impossible was happening. A ruthless billionaire was learning to be human again. And it all started with 4 tiny babies, a fierce mother, and the courage to believe that redemption was possible, even for someone who didn't deserve it. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur that fundamentally rewrote Marcus Kane's existence. He didn't just offer Amber a job. He dismantled his entire life to make room for what she and her babies needed. First came the practical matters. Marcus purchased a spacious apartment in his building, 3 floors down, close enough for support but far enough for privacy. He hired a night nurse to help Amber sleep. He connected her with the best pediatricians in Manhattan. He arranged for a moving company to retrieve what little belongings she had from storage. But he didn't just throw money at the situation. He showed up. Daily. Awkwardly at first, then with growing confidence. He learned how to hold the babies properly, how to distinguish Grace's cry from Joy's, how to warm bottles to the exact right temperature. He sat with Amber as she worked on preliminary designs for the digital division, offering feedback from his decades of business experience while respecting her creative vision. The babies became his teachers in ways he couldn't have predicted. Faith taught him patience. She was colicky and only settled when held at a specific angle and rocked at a specific rhythm. Hope taught him presence. She stared at faces with such intensity that you couldn't multitask, couldn't check your phone, couldn't be anywhere but right there with her. Grace taught him gentleness. She was the smallest, the most delicate, and holding her required a softness Marcus hadn't accessed in decades. And Joy taught him joy, simple, uncomplicated delight in the world. But the harder work was the promise he'd made. Reaching out to his own family. It took Marcus 5 days to gather the courage to write the email to Michael. He drafted it 20 times, deleting each attempt. Too formal. Too emotional. Too defensive. Finally, at 2 a.m. on January 5th, while feeding Joy his midnight bottle, he wrote from the heart. Michael, I don't expect you to read this, let alone respond. But I need to say it anyway. I was a terrible father. You deserved better. Sarah and Jennifer deserved better. Your mother deserved better. I told myself I was building a legacy for you, but what I actually built was a wall between us. I chose my empire over my family, again and again, until you all quite reasonably gave up on me. I can't change the past. But something happened this Christmas that made me realize I don't want to waste whatever time I have left being the person I've been. I want to try to be better. To be someone worthy of the family I lost. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I'm asking for a chance. To meet your children. To apologize in person. To show you that maybe, finally, I understand what actually matters. If you can't do that, I understand. But please know that I love you. Always did. I just didn't know how to show it in any way that mattered. Your father. He sent it before he could second-guess himself. Then he waited. The response came 3 days later, and it wasn't what he expected. Emma saw your email over my shoulder and asked who you were. I told her you were her grandfather. She asked why she'd never met you. I didn't have a good answer. She wants to meet you. I'm not sure I'm ready, but Sarah and Jennifer and I have talked. We're willing to try. For the kids. They deserve to know their grandfather, even if we're not sure we can forgive you. January 15th, 2 p.m. Sarah's house in Connecticut. Don't bring gifts. Don't try to buy your way in. Just show up and be present. If you can manage that, maybe we can start to build something. Marcus cried when he read it. Actual tears, sliding down his face while he sat in his study surrounded by the monuments to his success. Amber found him like that when she brought Joy up for a visit. Good news or bad news? She asked. Good news that feels terrifying, Marcus admitted. My son responded. I'm meeting my grandchildren in 10 days. Amber smiled. You're going to be fine. You've been practicing, remember? Faith, hope, grace, and joy have been training you. What if I mess it up? Marcus asked. What if I say the wrong thing or they hate me or... Then you try again, Amber interrupted gently. That's what being human means. We mess up. We try again. We keep showing up. The babies taught me that. Every time I thought I couldn't handle another sleepless night, another crying fit, another moment of overwhelming responsibility, I showed up anyway. Not because I was strong, but because love doesn't give you a choice. Marcus looked at this young woman who'd lost everything and somehow found the strength to rebuild. You're wise beyond your years. I'm tired beyond my years, Amber corrected with a laugh. But I'm also happy. Happier than I've been since David died. You gave us that, Marcus. You gave us hope. Now go give that to your own family. January 15th arrived too quickly. Marcus stood outside his daughter Sarah's Connecticut home, his hands shaking. The house was beautiful, colonial style, with a wraparound porch and smoke curling from the chimney. Through the window, he could see movement, hear laughter. Life happening inside, life that had continued without him. He almost left. Almost got back in his car and drove away. But then he remembered Joy's tiny hand grasping his finger. Remembered Amber's courage walking into his building on Christmas Eve. Remembered Patricia's letter, I hope you find that before you die alone. He knocked. Michael opened the door. He was 42 now, with gray streaking his temples and his mother's kind eyes. They stared at each other for a long moment, years of hurt and anger and loss compressed into that single look. You came, Michael said finally. You invited me, Marcus replied. I know I failed at showing up before. I'm here now. Michael stepped aside. Marcus entered his daughter's home and found himself surrounded by family. Sarah, 40 and pregnant with her 4th child. Jennifer, 38 and fierce-looking with her mother's sharp intelligence. And the grandchildren Emma, Lucas, Sophia, and Jackson. 4 faces staring at him with curiosity rather than judgment. Kids, Sarah said, her voice tight but controlled. This is your grandfather, Marcus. Say hello. Hello, Grandfather Marcus, Emma said formally. She was 7, with pigtails and her father's smile. I like your tie. Marcus looked down at his tie, covered in cartoon baby animals. Amber had given it to him as a joke, saying if he was going to be around babies, he should look the part. He'd worn it as armor, something to remind him why he was doing this. Thank you, Marcus said, his voice rough. I'm very glad to meet you, Emma. The afternoon was awkward and painful and beautiful. They didn't talk about the past, not directly. Instead, they existed in the present. Marcus sat on the floor, his $2,000 suit pants be damned, and played blocks with Jackson. He listened to Sophia explain her rock collection in exhaustive detail. He helped Lucas with a math problem. He told Emma stories about her grandmother Patricia that made her laugh. His children watched warily, not participating but not preventing. At one point, Jennifer pulled him aside. "I need you to understand something," she said quietly. "We're doing this for them. Not for you. You don't get to walk back into our lives and pretend the past didn't happen." "I know," Marcus said. "I'm not asking you to forget. I'm just asking you to let me try to be better." "Why now?" Jennifer demanded, her eyes flashing. "What changed? Why do you suddenly care after all these years?" Marcus told her about Christmas Eve, about Amber and the babies, about holding joy at 2 a.m. and feeling human for the first time in decades, about realizing that all his success meant nothing if he died alone and unloved. "A woman with quadruplets shamed you into being a decent person?" Jennifer said incredulously. "Yes," Marcus admitted. "That's exactly what happened. And I'm grateful for it." Jennifer studied him for a long moment, then shook her head. "You're still impossible. But maybe you're trying. That's more than I expected." As Marcus prepared to leave that evening, Emma ran up and hugged his legs. The gesture was so spontaneous, so trusting, that Marcus froze. Then he bent down and hugged her back, this granddaughter he'd never known, and felt his heart crack open in a way that was painful and necessary and right. "Will you come back?" Emma asked. Marcus looked at Michael, at Sarah, at Jennifer. They didn't nod or smile. But they didn't say no either. "If your parents say it's okay," Marcus said carefully, "then yes, I'll come back." "Next month," Michael said finally. "Let's try this again next month." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't redemption. But it was a start. And sometimes, Marcus was learning, a start was everything. 3 months later, on a warm April morning, Marcus stood in his office building lobby waiting for Amber's first official day of work. She arrived pushing a quad stroller, a high-tech monstrosity Marcus had purchased that could navigate any terrain, with faith, hope, grace, and joy dressed in matching outfits. "Ready to change the world?" Marcus asked. "Ready to design some killer graphics," Amber corrected with a grin. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves." They rode the elevator together, Marcus pointing out different departments, Amber already talking about her vision for the digital division. The babies babbled and cooed, and other employees stopped to admire them. Some recognized Marcus and did double takes. The Ruthless was helping a woman with a stroller, making funny faces at babies, looking almost happy. The on-site childcare facility Marcus had created was state-of-the-art, with trained nurses and every safety feature money could buy. But more than that, it had warmth, color, the feeling of a place designed with love. Amber had helped plan it, insisting it should be welcoming for all Kane Industries employees with children, not just her babies. "You're going to revolutionize parental leave policies across the industry," Marcus's CFO had warned him. "Other companies will have to follow suit. It's going to cost millions." "Good," Marcus had replied. "Let it cost millions. Let every company realize that supporting families is good business. That people who aren't constantly stressed about childcare are more productive. That basic human decency is actually profitable." As Amber settled into her new office, spacious, with a window overlooking Central Park and a door that connected to the childcare facility, Marcus watched her arrange her family photos. David's picture held pride of place, his handsome face frozen in a moment of joy. Amber caught Marcus looking and smiled sadly. "He would have loved this," she said. "The opportunity, the work, all of it. He was so proud of his talents. It killed him to be driving rideshare after everything he'd accomplished." "I'm sorry," Marcus said. "I'll never stop being sorry for my part in that." "I know," Amber replied. "And I appreciate it. But sorry isn't enough anymore, Marcus. Now you have to be better. Every day. For the rest of your life. That's the price of redemption." "I'm willing to pay it," Marcus said. And he meant it. Over the following months, Marcus Kane became a different person. Not overnight, transformation never happened that way. But gradually, steadily he shifted his priorities. He reduced his work hours. He attended his grandchildren's school events. He had dinner with Michael's family every other week, slowly rebuilding trust. He mentored Amber, watching her create stunning designs that revolutionized Kane Media's brand. He held the quadruplets whenever Amber needed a break, and discovered that being needed was infinitely more satisfying than being feared. He also changed his company's culture. Anonymous ethics hotlines were established. Performance reviews included character assessments. Managers who prioritized people over profits were promoted. It wasn't perfect. Institutions changed slowly, but it was progress. On Christmas Eve, 1 year after their first meeting, Marcus hosted dinner in his penthouse. Amber and the babies were there, of course. But so were Michael, Sarah, and Jennifer with their families. The once empty fortress was full of noise and life and chaos. Children running, babies crying, adults laughing. Emma found Marcus in his study, where he'd retreated for a moment of quiet. She climbed into his lap, something she did now without hesitation, and looked up at him seriously. "Grandfather Marcus, are you happy now?" she asked. Marcus looked out at his family, at the life he'd almost lost forever, at the second chance he hadn't deserved but had been given anyway. He thought about David Robinson, about the debt he could never fully repay. About Patricia's letter and her hope that he'd find what mattered before it was too late. "Yes," he said, holding Emma close. "I'm happy now." "Good," Emma said. "Because you smile more now. I like when you smile." That evening, as everyone gathered for dinner, Marcus stood to make a toast. 14 faces looked at him. His children and grandchildren, Amber and the quadruplets who were now walking and creating beautiful chaos. His assistant who'd become family through proximity and persistence. "A year ago," Marcus began, "I was alone. I'd built an empire but destroyed everything that made life worth living. I thought power was the point. Success was the goal. I was wrong." He looked at Amber, who nodded encouragingly. "Then someone very brave walked into my life on Christmas Eve and showed me what real strength looked like. What real wealth meant. She taught me that family isn't just blood, it's choice. It's showing up. It's loving people even when it's hard." Marcus's voice thickened with emotion. "I can't undo the past. I hurt people, including everyone in this room. But I can try to be better. Every day. For as long as I have left. And I want you all to know, having you here, being part of your lives, knowing I didn't miss everything, that's worth more than every dollar I ever made." Michael raised his glass. "To second chances. To family," Sarah added. "To love," Jennifer said, looking at Marcus with something that might have been forgiveness. "To Christmas miracles," Amber finished, her eyes bright with tears. They toasted, and dinner began, messy and loud and absolutely perfect. Later, as Marcus helped Amber feed the babies before bed, Joy reached up and touched his face. The same gesture from a year ago, but now the baby knew him, trusted him, loved him. "Thank you," Marcus whispered, "for saving me." Amber smiled. "We saved each other, Marcus. That's how this works." As the babies fell asleep and the sounds of his family echoed through the penthouse, Marcus Kane stood at his window overlooking the city. The same view as a year ago. But everything had changed. The lights weren't just property values anymore. They were homes. The buildings weren't just investments. They were places where people lived and loved and built lives that mattered. He'd spent his whole life accumulating wealth. But in the end, the only thing that made him rich was love. The messy, complicated, imperfect kind. The kind you had to choose every single day. The kind that cost everything and gave back infinitely more. Marcus Kane died 17 years later, at 85, surrounded by his family. His children held his hands. His grandchildren, and by then great-grandchildren, filled the room. Amber was there too, with faith, hope, grace, and joy, now young adults preparing for their own futures. His will shocked the business world. The majority of his fortune went to educational scholarships for children who'd lost parents, to programs supporting single mothers, to organizations fighting systemic injustice. The company was restructured as a B Corp, prioritizing people over profits. But his real legacy wasn't money. It was the lives he'd touched, the second chances he'd given and received, the proof that transformation was possible, even for someone who'd spent decades being exactly the wrong kind of person. At his funeral, Emma, now 24 and a teacher, stood to speak. "My grandfather taught me that it's never too late to become who you should have been. That redemption isn't about erasing the past, but about building a better future. That the bravest thing you can do is admit you were wrong and then do the hard work of changing." She looked at faith, hope, grace, and joy in the front row. "And he taught me that sometimes, miracles come in the form of 4 babies and their mother who walked into a billionaire's fortress on Christmas Eve and reminded him what it meant to be human." After the service, as everyone gathered to share memories, Joy pulled Marcus's daughter Sarah aside. "Your father saved my mother's life," he said quietly. "But she saved his too. That's what love does. It saves us all." And in the end, that was the truth. Not that Marcus Kane had been a villain who became a hero, but that he'd been a broken man who learned to heal, who discovered that wealth meant nothing without connection, that power was meaningless without purpose, that the only empire worth building was one made of love, family, and the courage to be vulnerable. He'd started his life alone. He'd almost ended it that way. But because of one snowy Christmas Eve, because of 4 babies and their fierce mother, because of the possibility of redemption, he'd found his way home. And that, more than any business success, was his greatest achievement. What would you have done if you were Marcus Kane? Here's a man who spent decades building an empire, destroying lives along the way, only to realize on Christmas Eve that he'd lost everything that actually mattered. And then Amber Robinson, a widow with 4 babies, drowning in medical debt because of Marcus's own company's cruelty, walked into his fortress. She didn't come begging. She came demanding accountability, justice, truth. This story isn't just about a billionaire's redemption. It's about every single person who's been crushed by systems that value profit over people. It's about David Robinson, a whistleblower who did the right thing and paid for it with his career and ultimately his life. It's about Amber, who refused to let poverty destroy her dignity. It's about those 4 babies, faith, hope, grace, and joy, whose names became prophecies. How many David Robinsons are out there right now? How many brilliant, ethical people have been silenced, fired, blacklisted because they dared to tell the truth? How many Ambers are struggling alone, trapped between medical debt and impossible choices? This story makes our blood boil because it's real. It happens every day. And most of the time, there's no Marcus Kane learning to be better. Most of the time, the system just keeps crushing people. But here's what gives me hope: transformation is possible. Second chances are real. Not because people deserve them, but because love demands them. Because children like Emma teach us forgiveness. Because babies like Joy remind us what actually matters. Because people like Amber refuse to give up, even when the world gives them every reason to. If this story made your heart ache, if it made you angry about injustice, if it gave you even a sliver of hope that people can change and systems can be reformed, then I need you to do something for me right now. Smash that like button if you believe in second chances. If you think powerful people should be held accountable. If you've ever felt crushed by a system that didn't care about you as a human being. Drop a comment telling me, what would you have said to Marcus Kane on that Christmas Eve? Would you have given him a second chance like Amber did? Or would you have walked away? I want to hear your stories. Have you ever had to choose between pride and survival? Between justice and practicality? Tell me in the comments. Your story matters. Subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell because every week I bring you stories like this. Stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Stories about justice, redemption, and the power of human connection. Stories that remind us we're not alone in this fight. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Your friend who's struggling as a single parent. Your colleague who got screwed over by corporate greed. Your family member who's lost faith in humanity. Let them know that transformation is possible. That love wins. That we're all connected, and we all deserve dignity. This is more than a story. It's a movement. A community of people who believe that the world can be better, that powerful people can change, that justice, real justice, is worth fighting for. Comment, family is love, if you're with me. If you believe that real wealth isn't measured in dollars but in the people who show up for you. Let's flood the comments with that message. Let's create a wave so big that it reminds everyone watching that they're part of something bigger. You're not just a viewer. You're part of this family. And family doesn't let each other face the darkness alone. Hit like, comment, subscribe. Let's change the world one story at a time. Family is love. Now go be someone's Christmas miracle.